Imagine walking out to your own Wyoming pasture, ready to finally fence your land, when a helicopter suddenly drops out of the sky like it's auditioning for an action movie, only for HOA. Karen to march out, wagging her finger, and order you to stop. That was the moment I realized my quiet rural life was about to turn into the strangest showdown I'd ever faced. And it all started long before the helicopter, with a different Karen disaster, one involving cows, selfies, and a manure loader. It began on a windy Thursday morning, the kind where the Wyoming horizon looks endless and trouble feels unlikely. I had just finished checking the north pasture when I noticed a teenage girl posing suspiciously close to my herd of Black Angus. At first, I thought she might have been a lost hiker or a wildlife photographer with terrible judgment. But then she struck a duck face pose, held up her phone, and leaned her head against one of my cows like it was a petting zoo prop. That's when I recognized her. Karen's daughter, Meadow. Yes, Karen named her kid after a grassy field. Fitting. I approached calmly at first because cows don't appreciate chaos. "Hey there," I called out. Not safe to crowd them like that, but Meadow barely glanced at me before rolling her eyes hard, enough to rotate her whole skull. "Relax," she said. "It's for my followers. They love aesthetic farm content." Aesthetic farm content. Before I could respond, Meadow backed up into a fresh pile of cow manure. I swear the cow behind her smirked. She squealed, which spooked the cows, which made her squeal louder. That's when inspiration struck. A petty idea, sure, but a satisfying one. I hopped onto my manure loader, rolled right into the background of her next accidental selfie, and lifted the bucket high like I was preparing to baptize the prairie in cow poop glory. Her phone snapped a burst of photos. Me, the loader, the shovel full of Wyoming's finest organic material. Before she realized what was happening, she shrieked again and bolted straight toward the fence line, slipping twice, adding more aesthetic to her outfit. I figured that would be the end of it. A funny ranch-side incident, maybe even a good story for the local cafe. But 2 hours later, Karen herself stormed up my driveway demanding an apology, compensation for trauma, and a promise that I'd control my cows' attitudes. And as the sun dipped behind the buttes that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's outrage was building towards something bigger, something louder, and something more absurd than selfies. The next morning, before the sun even cleared the ridge, I heard tires crunching up my gravel drive. Only one person in all of Wyoming drove that slowly yet somehow angrily: Karen. She emerged from her SUV with a clipboard, sunglasses, and the self-importance of a sheriff despite having no actual authority, beyond her own imagination. I braced myself, but I didn't expect the conversation that followed. She didn't bother with a greeting. "I've reviewed the situation," she announced, waving her clipboard like it was a court order. "You are responsible for my daughter's emotional distress, her soiled clothing, and her sudden loss of social media confidence." Social media confidence? I wasn't aware that was a billable item. I stayed calm, leaning against the fence. "Your daughter trespassed," I reminded her, "and she scared the cows." That last part seemed important, because the herd was still giving side-eye toward the spot where Meadow had been posing. Karen sniffed. The cows weren't scared. They were rude. Now, I've been ranching a long time, and I've heard some wild statements, but accusing cattle of poor manners was a new one. She held out her clipboard again. "I've listed demands. You'll reimburse me for Meadow's shoes, phone cleaning, and therapy." I scanned the page. She actually itemized emotional restoration. She also added something even stranger: cease all antagonistic farm equipment behavior. I looked up, blinking. "You mean the manure loader?" She nodded gravely. It intimidated her. I tried not to laugh, but one snort escaped. That was all it took. Karen jabbed a finger toward me. "This," she hissed, "is exactly why we need order around here. I'm organizing the community. There will be rules." That's when she said the line that froze me mid-breath. "We're forming an HOA. Wyoming, wide open spaces. People with more land than neighbors." An HOA here was like a cactus joining a swimming team, completely unfit for the environment. "You're kidding," I said. But the set of her jaw told me she wasn't. She claimed she wanted uniform standards and visual harmony. Translation: she wanted control. I shrugged it off at first. People say all kinds of things after their daughter falls face first into cow manure. But later that afternoon, I saw Karen walking property to property, gathering signatures and explaining her grand vision. And every hour, her clipboard got fuller. The real problem? My land bordered several homeowners who didn't know me well and were easily persuaded by promises of neighborhood improvement. I had no idea just how far Karen intended to push her new power and how it would collide directly with my fencing plans. For the next few days, life on the ranch felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. When Karen wasn't stomping around collecting signatures, she was hosting little planning meetings in her driveway, complete with lemonade, lawn chairs, and a big poster board that said Community Harmony Initiative. Out here, community harmony usually meant not bothering your neighbors. To Karen, it meant the opposite. I focused on my fencing project, thinking fresh cedar posts and heavy-gauge wire would give me some peace of mind. My property needed better boundaries, especially now that Meadow treated my cows like unpaid influencers. I'd staked out the first 100 feet and even hauled equipment to the South Ridge. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing, like the air just before a hailstorm. On the third morning, my suspicion turned into reality. I found a laminated notice zip-tied to my gate. Karen's style was unmistakable: bold font, excessive underlining, and 3 different pastel highlighting colors. It read, "Effective immediately. All construction, fencing, and structural adjustments require HOA pre-approval." Below it was a signature line with Karen's name, and 16 homeowner signatures. I stared at it, baffled. Not because they formed an HOA. That was absurd, but not impossible. What baffled me was that whoever signed this thing believed an HOA could just appear overnight and take authority over land that wasn't even part of their subdivision. My ranch predated their entire cul-de-sac. My deed didn't include a single HOA clause. I marched straight to Karen's house. She answered the door with the smug smile of a cat who'd taken up real estate in a bird feeder. "I see you received our notice," she said. "Please submit your fence plans for approval." "There's no HOA here," I told her. "My property isn't part of it." Karen squinted like I'd spoken nonsense. "That's the old way of thinking. We're modernizing the community. Your land is visually adjacent, so it affects us. Therefore, it falls under our authority." Visual adjacency, a term she'd clearly invented on her porch between sips of lemonade. I asked her to show me any legal documentation, any county paperwork, any justification beyond her pastel-laminated crafts. She waved dismissively. "We're getting to that. But until then, all projects must pause, especially fencing." I headed back to the ranch, frustrated but not defeated. I'd dealt with stubborn cattle, malfunctioning equipment, and Wyoming blizzards. Karen was just another obstacle, an annoying, clipboard-carrying tumbleweed. But the universe must have decided the situation wasn't dramatic enough. Because the very next morning, I heard a thunderous chopping sound slicing through the sky. A helicopter, low, fast, coming straight toward my pasture. And whatever was about to happen would make the selfie incident look tame. The helicopter skimmed across the Wyoming sky like it was late for a rescue mission. Dust whipped across the pasture, cows scattered, and I shielded my eyes against the roar. It circled once, low enough that I could see the pilot's sunglasses, before sweeping toward the southern ridge where I'd staged my fencing supplies. I took off running, boots hammering the dirt, shouting over the blades, though no one could possibly hear me. The chopper settled onto my land with a gust that nearly knocked me sideways. Grass flattened in a perfect circle beneath it, and the moment the skids touched the ground, the side door slid open with theatrical flair, like someone wanted an entrance. Out stepped Karen, clutching her clipboard against the wind like it was classified military intel. Meadow followed, filming everything with a fresh, manure-free phone. I couldn't believe it. She'd arrived by helicopter, onto my ranch, to deliver more HOA nonsense. Karen marched toward me with purpose. "Construction on this property is officially halted," she declared, raising her voice to compete with the engine still whining behind her. "The HOA board," she gestured at herself, "has determined your fencing poses a risk to community aesthetic cohesion." I stared at her, speechless for a moment. "You landed a helicopter," I finally said, "on my land, to tell me not to build a fence." She nodded briskly, as if that made perfect sense. "The situation has escalated," she replied. "Your refusal to comply forced us to take emergency action." "Emergency?" I echoed. "What emergency? My fence posts?" She handed me a new laminated notice, still warm from whatever binder machine she'd used. In bold letters, "Cease and desist, pending visual review." Beneath it, "This includes all posts, stakes, wire, tools, and preparatory activities." I scanned it, then looked up sharply. "Karen, you can't enforce this. Legally, you have zero authority here." Karen straightened her posture. "Authority," she said, "is sometimes about leadership, and I am providing leadership." Behind her, Meadow zoomed in on my face. "Mom, get closer," she whispered. "Drama improves engagement." My patience snapped. "You are trespassing," I warned. "Both of you. And that helicopter is scaring my livestock." "Right on cue," one of my cows bellowed angrily, clearly disagreeing. I pointed toward the helicopter. "You need to leave, now." Karen's eyes narrowed. "If you proceed with this fence," she said, "the HOA will take further action." I folded my arms. "Bring it." She opened her mouth, then hesitated. For the first time, she seemed unsure, like she'd expected me to fold under the noise and theatrics. Instead, I stood my ground. Karen huffed, spun on her heel, and signaled the pilot. Meadow kept filming as they climbed back into the helicopter. The blades roared to life again, kicking up another angry storm of dust. As it lifted off, I realized something important. Karen wasn't done escalating. Not even close. When the helicopter finally disappeared over the ridge, I stood alone in the settling dust, wondering how one determined neighbor had turned my quiet Wyoming routine into a full-blown circus. But if Karen thought aerial intimidation would stop me, she clearly underestimated a man who had survived blizzards, ornery cattle, and equipment breakdowns at the worst possible moments. I returned to the ridge, checked the posts the rotor wash had knocked askew, and calmly began resetting every board, determined not to give her the smallest victory. Halfway through lining up the wire, I heard an engine rumbling toward the fence line, and for a moment I feared Karen had escalated again. Instead, old Mr. Dalton from the next property rolled up in his battered pickup, tipped his hat, and said he figured I might need an extra pair of hands. Word of Karen's airborne theatrics had traveled fast, and according to Dalton, half the neighbors were beginning to question why someone with a cul-de-sac mindset thought she could govern open rangeland. Soon more trucks arrived, folks parking along the ridge, some offering tools, others offering opinions, but all united in their belief that Karen had finally overstepped. We worked together through the morning, settling posts, tightening wire, and laughing whenever someone imitated Karen's dramatic proclamation about community aesthetic cohesion. By noon, the fence stretched solid and straight across the ridge, a clear and undeniable boundary that even Karen's helicopter couldn't erase. As we admired the finished line, Meadow appeared on the hilltop, phone raised, filming as if she were documenting a wildlife event rather than a group of irritated neighbors building a perfectly legal fence. A moment later, Karen climbed out of her SUV, clearly expecting confrontation, but instead of stopping us, she found 20 people staring back, none interested in her clipboard authority. She demanded we disperse, but Dalton reminded her she had no jurisdiction, no legal standing, and no right to trespass on private land while issuing imaginary regulations. For the first time since this chaos began, Karen's confidence wavered, and she slowly backed toward her SUV. As her audience continued watching in unimpressed silence, Meadow lowered her phone, finally sensing that this episode would not boost her online engagement, and hurried after her mother with far less attitude than usual. The moment they drove off, the ridge erupted in relieved laughter, the kind that settles tension and reminds everyone that common sense can still prevail in strange times. When the last truck pulled away, I walked the new fence line alone, grateful for neighbors who showed up when it mattered most. In the quiet that followed, the cows grazed peacefully again, completely unbothered, as if reminding me that life on the land always outlasts unnecessary drama. Always.